Alright guys, in this video I'm going to go through a question on functions and their graphs. So I'm given a function f of x equals 2x squared over x to the 4 plus 1. So I'm given a rational function and I'm asked a series of questions about this function. So our task is to answer these questions about this function. Alright, so the first question is minus 1, 1 on the graph of this function. That's our question. In order to answer that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find f of negative 1. And I'm going to see if f of negative 1 is equal to 1. So that, therefore, in other words, for an input of negative 1, does my function give me back 1? So let me just find out. So f of x is 2x squared. So f of negative 1 will be 2 times negative 1 squared all over negative 1 to the 4 plus 1. Minus 1 squared is 1, so I have 2 times 1. Minus 1 to the 4 is also 1 plus 1. So that is 1 plus 1 downstairs. 2 times 1 upstairs I have 2. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 over 2, sure enough, that's 1. And so I find that f of negative 1 is in fact equal to 1. That means that the point minus 1, 1 is on the graph of f of x. So the answer to the first question is yes. Minus 1, 1 is on the graph. All right. Second part. We were asked if x is equal to 2, what is f of x? So in other words, what I want to do here is I want to find f of 2. Find f of 2. I'm given f of x, I want to find f of 2. So, f of 2. That will be 2 times 2 squared, replacing x with 2. Here I have 2 to the 4, 2 raised to the power of 4, plus 1. That is f of 2. Going through the algebra, I have upstairs 2 times 2 squared is 4. Down here I have 2 to the 4. 2 to the 4 is 16 plus 1. And so, distributing, I have 2 times 4, that's 8, all over 16 plus 1, 17. And so I find that f of 2 is equal to 8 over 17. Or when x is equal to 2, f of x is equal to 8 over 17. Okay, that's part B completed. Part C, if f of x is equal to 1, what is x? All right, so if f of x, which is this function, is equal to 1, what is the value of x? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let my function equal to 1. Well, my function is 2x squared all over x to the 4 plus 1. So I'm going to let my function equal to 1 and I'm going to solve it. If a fraction is equal to 1, it means that the numerator and the denominator must be equal. And so I can say that 2x squared must be equal to x to the 4 plus 1. Must be the case that the numerator and the denominator are equal if the fraction overall is equal to 1. And so I have this equation right here. I'm going to rearrange this. I'm going to bring my 2x squared to the right-hand side. I will have x to the 4. It will become minus 2x squared. I have a plus 1. And now that's equal to 0. So I have x to the 4. I subtract 2x squared to the other side. Plus 1 is equal to 0. And so now I need to solve this. And the way I'm going to solve this is essentially by the reverse FOIL process. I'm going to factor this trinomial right here. And so what I will do, I will take my factors. Here I have an x to the 4. So I'm going to put here x squared and x squared. I'm going to do a little trial and error here. So I'm going to go x squared and x squared. I know that that would give me x to the 4. And my third term in my trinomial is 1. And so I'm looking here for factors of 1. Well, the only factors that would give me plus 1 are either plus 1 and plus 1 or minus 1 and minus 1. I notice that I need to, my middle term is negative 2x squared, and so the factors that I'm looking for will be negative 1 and negative 1. And I can check, if I was to FOIL this out, notice that my x squared times my x squared will give me x to the 4. I would have here minus x squared minus x squared. That would give me minus 2x squared. That would be my central term. And then minus 1 times minus 1 gives me plus 1. And so these are, in fact, my factors. It's equal to 0. So I have a repeating factor, x squared minus 1. And so I find that x squared minus 1 is equal to 0. If x squared minus 1 is equal to 0, then x squared is equal to 1. And if x squared is equal to 1, then x is equal to plus or minus 1. And so for if f of x is equal to 1, then x is equal to plus or minus 1. What it means is that for an input of 1, my function will give me back 1. So I will have the point 1, 1 will be on the graph. For an input x of plus 1, my function will give me back 1. But also for an input of minus 1, my function will also give me back 1. And so the point 1, 1 and the point negative 1, 1 are both on the graph of f of x. Okay, so that's that third part done. Part D. What is the domain of f? So we want the domain of this function. It is a rational function. The only thing to watch for when you have a rational function, or at least something to be aware of, is that our denominator cannot be 0. Our denominator in this case is x to the 4 plus 1. X to the 4 or the power plus 1. This cannot be equal to 0. So in order to check for what values of x might let this equal to 0, I'm going to, when I make this 0, I'm going to let it equal to 0 and solve it. So for what values of x would x to the 4 plus 1 be equal to 0? If I can find any values of x that would solve this, would be solutions for this equation, then I must omit those from my domain. So solving this, subtract 1 to the other side, I get x to the 4 is therefore equal to negative 1. And so taking the fourth root, x will be equal to the fourth root of negative 1. Well, the fourth root of negative 1 is not real. It is not real. There's no real solutions to this equation. And so, all right, there are no real solutions. And so we can conclude then that all values of x are in the domain of f of x. So the domain of f of x, domain is all real numbers. All real numbers are in the domain of f of x. All right, that's part D. Again there. Part E. List the x-intercepts of the function if there are any. Well, in order to find the x-intercepts, I need to let f of x equal to 0. So I need to let f of x equal to 0 and solve it. That means I'm going to let 2x squared all over x to the 4 plus 1 equal to 0. Well, when is this function equal to 0? When is this fraction equal to 0? When 2x squared is equal to 0. When the numerator is equal to 0. And so I will solve 2x squared is equal to 0. For what values of x is 2x squared equal to 0? Well, 2 is not 0. So therefore, it must be that x squared is equal to 0. If x squared is equal to 0, then x must be equal to 0. And so we find that the x-intercept of this function is at x equals 0. That is the x-intercept of this function. Okay. going to find the y-intercepts, if there are any. Well, in order to find the y-intercepts, we're going to let x equal to 0. In other words, we're going to find f of 0. That will give me the y-intercepts. Right? Let x equal to 0. In other words, find f of 0. Whatever I find, that's the y-intercept. And so f of 0 is 2 times 0 squared all over 0 to the 4 plus 1. 0 squared is 0. 0 times 2, I have a 0 up on top. Downstairs, I have 0 plus 1, that's 1. 0 over 1 is 0. And so the y-intercept is also 0. And so my x-intercept is 0, and my y-intercept is also 0. And that's it. That is the question complete.